So we have a different project today. This is a 2008 Nissan Altima. This belongs to a friend slash co-worker of mine. She took it into the shop for a little maintenance and they pointed out that the shocks and struts were leaking. We will be referencing several torque specs while we're doing this. It is something very important anytime you're working on suspension linkage. Something you really don't want to guesstimate on. Having something break or come loose while you're driving is never a fun situation. Definitely going to leave you stranded on the road at the bare minimal. So here's the parts we're going to be putting on this car today. As I mentioned before, KYB is the brand. As you note, we have two different part numbers on the larger boxes. That's the front shock struts. And we've got the same part number on our two smaller boxes, which is the rear shock struts. So the two for the front are different for a reason. They are side to side, left to right. So as we go back on, I'll mention which part number went onto which side. So as you can see here, once I shine a little light on there, you can see how down the middle of the strut it's kind of has a white haze to it, and on either side looks a little darker. That is the fluid from the strut pushing out from the top and then running back down the side of the strut. As the gentleman that inspected it before said, these struts, they're not completely gone yet, but they definitely are in need of replacement before they do go and you wind up tearing up even more of your car. This is the kind of stuff that will make your car start feeling real squishy, marshmallowy as you're going down the road, hitting bumps. Car may even feel a little smoother up on the highway because now it has a floatiness at higher speeds. This is definitely not safe once the car starts feeling like that. Sudden turns at high speeds, the car is not going to be stable and it's going to wind up having a lot higher chance of breaking loose and losing control of the car. So here's a few things you want to kind of look at. You can really see it right there, and then back off in there you can see that really shiny silver back there. That's another bushing that the rubber has completely blown out. This is on the lower wishbone is what they usually call this part. That there, I'm going to have to look and see if I can get those bushings separate. A lot of times nowadays it's a whole component, so it just depends on what we can find on that, on how much that's going to cost to repair. But this is something I'm going to bring to her attention. So we do have a little bit of residue, not much. I think we're going to be pretty good on this. These look pretty nice and simple the way they mount them in. Shouldn't take long to get this changed out. You've got the wheel off. Go ahead and check your brakes. Since, you've already gone to work to get it all apart. Take a moment to do a little checking for preventative maintenance. Go ahead and look around at your rest of your suspension linkage. Make sure you don't have anything that's blowing out. Unfortunately, over time, these bushings and whatnot, they all give, and you wind up having to replace them. This car, for instance, I'm going to suggest she looks at getting this lower control arm here. This outer bushing is looking kind of rough. It's actually torn apart. I can see a gap in the rubber. So I'm going to suggest she gets that looked at here soon, whether by me or someone else. And when I went to take the lug nuts loose on this car, they were extremely loose. So whoever looked at it last, somehow or another did not get the lug nuts on tight. So be very careful. Just because you take it to a professional location to get your car worked on, it doesn't mean that they're going to give you a professional job. So you may want to double check those, or maybe even before you even leave, have them go back over it with a hand torque wrench and show you that the lugs are tight. Wheels can come off if they're not on there good tight. And once again, not a good scenario when you're going down the road, especially at highway speeds. A little closer look at this rear strut. You can see it's kind of dark, a little higher. So it's starting to get a little moisture in here. This one isn't terrible, but we're doing the fronts. The rears aren't a whole lot more. Might as well go ahead and get them done. The car does have 160,000 miles on it, So I'd be surprised if these struts last much longer. So here we are looking at the rear suspension. This is usually considered a trailing arm. It goes in front of the rear wheel hub and then hooks onto the rear wheel hub. So that seems to be in a bit of a rough shape up towards the front of the car. Back towards the actual wheel hub, everything looks okay. But we do have the lower arm, as you can see there. There we go. There you can see it's in pretty rough shape itself. It's tearing apart. So that's just an arm that shoots across in the middle to brace it there at the bottom. Other than that, she's looking pretty good on most other parts. That's starting to look a little rough, but not bad enough that I would consider replacing it. These kind of things can get rather pricey as well. I did this suspension on my Jaguar coupe not too long ago. Mind you, I went with poly bushings throughout the entire underside, partly because I wanted to help the car's handling, give it a little more sporty ride, and that did get quite pricey. We can see here we've also got bushing going out at the strut mount, so we definitely are going to have some bushings to be quoting to her to kind of give her an idea of what she's going to look at to get all that straightened out. This is not anything that's going to stop me from going ahead and doing the struts today. Mind you, it'd be nice to go ahead and have these bushings now to go ahead and knock out the ones that are going to tie to the strut. The struts themselves are going to take a little bit, so we'll focus on that. So we're going to start on the driver's side rear strut. It's got 2 bolts at the top and then a single bolt at the bottom. Now you're going to notice this piece here. This is a tool for just bracing or supporting things. So I'm going to go ahead and lift this up. So what I'm doing is catching right on a big chunk of the hub. But this here, as you notice, as I tighten, the suspension will compress. And what that's doing is relieving pressure on the strut. So the strut's always trying to push down and control how quickly this moves up and down while you're driving. So just pushing this suspension up just a little bit, keep some tension on the spring. Because if I take this loose without doing something to brace the suspension, this spring could push this down and possibly, if there's enough travel, shoot out of here, which definitely a dangerous thing if it happens. So we want to make sure we've got a good spot here, good solid spot on the hub to help hold this up in place. This will inevitably affect how easy it is to get this out. So here we are, the top of the rear strut. You've got 2 bolts, 1 on each side. That's a 13 millimeter. Once you have the tension off down low with the spring, you can go ahead and start busting these loose. And you're going to have a single bolt down at the bottom. And that is a 17 millimeter right here. And if you look at the opposite side, that nut, you can kind of see them. There's a couple of tack welds there. So it's welded in place. So unless that breaks loose, we shouldn't have to hold that. So simple matter of taking these loose and pulling the strut out. One thing I do want to make note of for you is some suspensions will have adjustments at different places. So you want to make sure anything that you take loose is marked before you take it loose if it is an adjustment point. This one here does not have an adjustment point, so all we've got to do is simply take this one out and put the new one in. Getting these loose, like I said, this is a 13 millimeter. I'm just using a ratchet on the extension with the deep well socket because it does have a fairly long stud on it. Shallow may not be able to get up there and catch on it. I did reposition the brace at the bottom, you may have noticed in the footage. Did that so that it's more underneath the swing arm tied to the spring. Just a little safer position I felt. Here we go. Like I said, it's got a little tension pulling itself down. So now that we've got that loose, we just got to do our lower bolt and that strut will come out. Once again, this is a 17. That one's on there pretty good. The upper bolts weren't near as tight. The This one here had a decent amount of torque. I'm going to get the new strut on, and I'll go back and torque them later once I have it back together. There we go. One stud. Those are a high tensile bolt. You want to make sure that if you do have to replace it for any reason, that you do go back with like a grade 8 bolt, as most suspension parts do. They do support the car, so you've got a lot of weight shifting around in there, so you need a strong steel bolt for anything that mounts suspension in place. And there we are. We've actually got a hole up in the top is where this goes. That ties in to the trunk. So we actually have a hole going into the trunk right now. But we're going to get the new short strut and transfer any parts over that need to be transferred. So here's the old strut next to the new strut for the rear. So you can see there's a few parts we have to transfer over to the new strut. It's got a slightly different design on the mount plate, but everything should be just fine there. Like I said, KYB, I've used these on several cars. Never really had trouble out of them. They seem to form just as good as the OEM equipment. So once you remove that rubber boot off the top, just simply pull it off. It just has a lip that catches over this little metal piece here. But once you have that off, you're going to have to hold the center stud while you wrench off the nut. So you won't be able to just simply throw a socket on this and spin it off. You are going to have to hold that with one hand and loosen it with the other. So I tend to use channel locks for this, something that's going to hold good and tight. So as you can see, it's going to get a good grip, and then I'll break loose the nut. Like I said, we're going to put the wrench. This is a 16mm wrench for that nut. I've already actually broken it loose, but you simply hold this with the channel locks and turn the nut. Reposition, and there you go. Once it gets loose enough, you may be able to just simply use the channel locks to walk it around just like this. I'm just loosening up the channel locks, repositioning with the wrench, and going up. This is a nylon thread lock nut. So what that means is this nut at the top has a nylon section that once you get past that nylon, it will actually hold the nut in that place to wherever you tighten it to, without having to have any kind of washers or anything to lock it down. So now we've got that nylon part past the threads. Like I said, you can kind of see the black nylon down there. Now we've got that past the threads, we can start taking this apart. So they gave us a new one of these, so I'm going to discard that. All these pieces here are new. I'm going to reuse their nut because it's a little heavier duty nut, as you can tell. Got a little more thickness to it. The nylon is going to hold just fine. You can reuse it again. If the nylon is damaged, I recommend not doing that, but the nylon in this one's just fine. So I'm going to reuse that nut. So we'll discard those, and there we go. We're sliding the upper retainer off. It's got a upper push plate right there. They did not give us a new one, so we will have to reuse this. They did give us a new bushing here, as well as a new sleeve, so I won't have to reuse that. I'm going to go ahead and push that together. So we will be using the new sleeve and the new bushing. The plate, they did not give us a new one of those, so we will be using the plate. And they did give us a new one of these as well. It's a slightly different design, it looks like. The thickness is just a bit thicker, but I think we're going to be fine. And of course, being new, the rubber is going to be softer. Probably going to help the ride a little bit. So we are going to reuse the KYB. Not to mention there may be something different about their setup. So like I said, we do have a new collar, so we will be using that new collar. We've also got the boot here, we will be reusing the boot. This is just the boot that goes over to help keep dust and debris from getting down into the strut and damaging it quickly. This here is soft rubber all the way up to here. It does have a hard plastic bushing inside there that just catches here on this lip, but then hangs down a little ways. So if the car gets, as in the term of being bottomed out, this actually creates a slightly softer impact on the strut itself. So that plastic bushing would actually be wedged between flange here and the strut, and it will give. So it's not like truly bottoming the car out. It does help cushion the blow if the car does wind up getting in a big dip or a large pothole and really slamming that back up in there. So just another safety thing manufacturers do now to try to help preserve the quality of the parts on the car. So now that I've got everything cleaned off pretty good, we should be ready to start going back together. We're going to slide our boot back over the new strut. So now that we've got the boot on, now we can get our collar in place. Then we're going to put our bushing on. And on top of that, we've got our mounting plate at the top, and you got your top bushing. And these have a lip on them, you can see there. This one as well. That lip gives a little bit of gap right there to where the metal is. Helps hold it in place. It also gives this piece a little bit of movement. So we're going to put our top washer on, start our nut. So as you see, we've got a little movement. Once I tighten this down, that movement will all but go away. But once you get the weight of the car on here, it definitely will have a little bit of movement that it's going to need as you drive down the road. Thanks to the internet, I was able to find the torque specs for this unit. Someone was nice enough to share their manual information that they had gathered. We're going to tighten this down as far as it'll go. Okay, as you see, I'm turning, but it's turning with me. So I'm going to have to hold this a bit and try to cinch it down a hair. Now this did not have a very tight torque spec. Going by the manual, it was showing to be 24 foot-pound for this. That's not a whole lot. The torque wrench I have here, its minimal is 20. So just to kind of give you an idea. So let's see if I can get this to tighten it all. The quick movements help. It's pretty much the same thing an impact does. It just does quick jerky movements. So if you try to sit here and do it slowly, it's probably not going to turn much for you. But if you give it that nice quick jerk, hopefully it will tighten for you. Alright. So now it's tightened down as far as it'll go. It's actually turning the lower section of the strut. So I'm going to try to hold this. So what I've got here is a crow's foot socket. So as you see, it's kind of throwing it off the side of the wrench. So I can use this to get on here and make that torque setting on here, because it is going to require that I make this movement while holding the end piece. I went ahead and added an extension so I could get that clearance. There we go. So you heard the click. Just had to brace and hold that as tight as I could as I crank it around. Just keep in mind, if you are using torque wrenches, extensions do affect the amount of torque that you're able to put on the nut on the end. The rule of thumb I've always been taught was for every 3 inches of extension, add a foot-pound of torque. So this one here is real short, so I'm not going to worry about adding any extra torque to that. So once again, that was a 16 millimeter at 24 foot-pound for the top nut. Now you can see I've got just a little bit of play here, nowhere near as much as I had before, because now that we've got all this tightened down and torqued down like it should be, we've got a nice tension put on both sides of the bushings, so that will give this the proper cushion as you drive down the road. Time to go ahead and put this back up in the car. And a quick note, double check our torque specs. Looks like our torque specs for the 2 nuts are going to be 18 foot-pound, and then our bottom one that goes down here is going to be 88 foot-pound. Like I said, substantially more torque down here than at the top to hold that in place. I'm going to put the upper section in first. I know you can't really see it, but I'm just shoving the portion here, piece with the rubber grommet on top. That just snapped over. Put that on after I torqued everything down. So that just snaps over, dust cover, to keep dust and stuff from getting in there. So I'm lining up my 2 holes on this with the 2 studs at the top of the wheel well. So, and then of course the rubber grommet goes up into the hole. So once I've got that in place, I can start these nuts. I'm going to run them down finger tight, and that will give us the nice mount that we were looking for, such as right there. So those there are simply in finger tight. Those are going to be the ones that are tightened down to 18 foot-pound, I believe it was. And then I'm going to run this stud in down here, and that one's going to be 88 foot-pound of torque. So you notice I'm having to kind of pull this down. It doesn't quite pull all the way down. That's fine. We're going to use our brace here to crank up the suspension as high as we can get it so it will line up. That may get it there. There we go. I'm going to run that in just like the top. Get it started, and then we'll run it the rest of the way in with the wrench. So I have a 9-inch extension here, so that's going to be 3 extra foot-pound of torque because 1 foot-pound per 3 inches. So that gives me a grand total of 21 foot-pound for these. Other side is on. There's our 2 13mm bolts, 18 foot-pound. Our 17mm bolt that torques down at 88 foot-pound. Once everything's tightened up, you're able to take the brace out and the suspension goes back to its natural resting position. Moving on to the front.